America spared your life, and you repay that debt by voting against the very principles we uphold." These words sliced through the Fox News town hall studio with the finality of a judicial verdict. Vice President J.D. Vance reclined in his chair with a relaxed demeanor, his arms resting easily, yet his Ohio accent bore the heavy resonance of working-class authenticity. This was the kid from Middletown who had transcended generational poverty through the Marine Corps, hard labor, and the construction of a tangible legacy. Now serving as Vice President of the United States, he sat opposite Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, whose designer hijab was flawlessly styled, while her media-trained smile was already dissolving into a defensive scowl before the true conflict had even commenced. She was woefully unprepared for the storm about to make landfall, while Brett Baer, the Fox News moderator, sat positioned between them at his anchor desk ready to ask tough questions of everyone. However, he had no intention of shielding Omar from accountability. For this was Fox. This was live. And the stakes were incredibly real. The studio audience was arranged in 3 distinct sections, with military families occupying the front rows, some in dress uniform, and others in civilian attire with purple hearts pinned to their chests. Behind them sat survivors of 9/11 and family members clutching photographs of loved ones lost on that tragic Tuesday, while the back rows were filled with Somali-American immigrants who had entered legally and cherished the nation that embraced them. All of them watched and waited as the town hall, titled Immigration and American Values, began its 90-minute commercial-free broadcast with cameras rolling and millions tuning in across the nation. Vance leaned forward just slightly, maintaining a voice that remained calm, possessing that specific Marine Corps composure one learns while treating casualties under enemy fire. It is the type of tranquility that is far more menacing than shouting because it signifies absolute control over the situation. "Congresswoman Omar, allow me to recount your story for everyone here, the factual narrative," he began, not reading from notes because he had memorized every detail of this cold. In mine, Somalia collapsed into a brutal civil war where militias were slaughtering civilians in the streets based entirely on their clan affiliations. Your family fled because remaining there meant certain death, and you were 9 years old, certainly old enough to recall the violence and the terror. Omar shifted uncomfortably in her seat, realizing where this trajectory was heading and clearly disliking the destination. Your family escaped to Kenya and spent 4 years in a refugee camp living in tents, unsure if you would ever possess a home again, ever be safe, or have opportunities beyond basic survival. Vance's voice carried no judgment, only hard facts as he built the foundation for his argument. Then America, the United States of America, said yes in 1995, accepting your family as refugees when we had no obligation to do so. We welcomed you, provided you safety when you had none, and granted you a future when yours had vanished. He ticked off the benefits on his fingers, listing education, health care, security, a path to citizenship, the right to vote, the right to run for office, and eventually a seat in the United States Congress. Let the magnitude of that reality sink in for a moment, that America provided you with absolutely everything, Congresswoman, literally everything you possess today. Your safety, your vast opportunities, your political power, and your platform are all gifts from this nation. Now Vance's voice took on a sharper edge, still controlled but significantly harder, as he noted that his family has been in this country for generations. We built America, labored in coal mines, served in every major war, paid our taxes, raised our families, and contributed to this nation for over a century. The contrast he drew was deliberate and devastating, noting that he served this country in the United States Marine Corps, deployed to Iraq, wore the uniform, and bled for America in the desert. He produced a folder containing Omar's voting record and her statements, all meticulously documented. So when I examine your record, Congresswoman, and I see you voting against our allies, defending our enemies, minimizing attacks on us, and attacking Americans who disagree with you, I must ask one very simple question. This was the first usage of the recurring hook that would define this entire confrontation live on Fox News with 60 million Americans watching. Which country do you represent? The question hung in the recycled air of the studio like an accusation that could not be appealed. Omar's mouth opened and closed as she glanced toward Brett Baier, silently pleading for assistance, for intervention, or for any lifeline. He merely watched and took notes, for this was news, and he could not save her. "It is a simple question, Congresswoman," Vance interrupted gently, but with absolute finality. "Which country do you represent?" He continued by noting that when looking at her votes, her statements, and her record, it simply does not appear that she represents the United States of America. He leaned back to let the audience absorb the weight of that statement. "It does not look like you represent the country that saved your life, gave you everything, and welcomed you when you had nowhere else to go." His voice dropped lower, becoming more dangerous as he stated that it looks like she represents everyone except the nation that rescued her. The military families in the front row leaned forward, some with jaws clenched and others shaking their heads, all of them knowing exactly what Vance was implying. They had served America, sacrificed for America, and bled for America. Yet here was someone America had saved who seemed to do nothing but attack it. Omar attempted her prepared deflection, stating, "Vice President Vance, I think this kind of questioning is—" Vance cut through immediately, not loud, but firm, fair, necessary, and long overdue. He spread his hands and reminded her that she is a United States Congresswoman who represents Americans, votes on American policy, and collects a salary paid by American taxpayers. So, yes, I think Americans deserve to know which country you represent because your voting record suggests it is not ours. The Marine who served America faced the refugee who attacked it, and the entire nation was watching live as the reckoning began. Brett Baier tried to regain some control of his town hall, suggesting they perhaps start with Congresswoman Omar's response. "No," Vance interrupted politely but firmly. "Let me establish the pattern first, and then she can respond to everything at once." He looked at Omar and stated that context matters, and the American people need to understand exactly what is being discussed. Vance did not recite dates like a history lesson, but instead painted a picture to make the audience see and feel it. He described Somalia in 1991 not as some distant political event, but as a place of genocide where warlords went door to door killing people, with bodies in the streets and children starving as the entire country descended into absolute chaos. His voice made it real and vivid, reminding her that her family fled because militias were hunting people like her, and staying meant certain death. "You escaped with nothing, just your lives," he said, showing a photo on the screen of the Dadaab refugee camp in Kenya with tents stretching for miles amid dust and poverty. "You spent 4 years there in tents with rationed food, no school, no future, just surviving day after day, wondering if this was all your life would ever be." The Somali Americans in the back of the audience nodded, for some had lived that reality and others had family who did. And then America said yes, Vance continued, his voice carrying the weight and importance of that moment. "The United States of America, a country on the other side of the world that owed you absolutely nothing, said, 'We will take you, we will give you safety, and we will give you a chance at life.'" He stood up now for the first time all night, the gesture deliberate, asking if she understood what that means and what America gave her. He walked toward a whiteboard they had set up and started writing, making a list that began with safety from violence so she could walk down the street without fearing militias or being killed. He wrote down free education, noting she went to good schools, had teachers who cared, and had opportunities she could never have imagined in Somalia or that refugee camp. He added health care, food, clean water, and electricity to the list, all the things Americans take for granted that she did not have. He kept writing, adding the path to citizenship, noting that America said she could become one of us with full rights, full participation, and full belonging. The list kept growing to include the right to vote, the right to run for office, and the right to criticize the government without being thrown in prison or killed, rights that do not exist in Somalia. He set down the marker and stepped back to let the audience see the full list. And eventually, a seat in the United States Congress, one of 435 people who make laws for 330 million Americans, holding one of the most powerful positions in our government. Vance turned to face Omar directly, stating that America gave her a life, literally saved her life, and then gave her opportunities beyond her wildest dreams. His voice hardened now as he asked, "And this is how you have repaid that extraordinary generosity?" He pulled out his phone and queued up videos of Omar's own words. The first clip played, where she stated that CARE was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something. The 9/11 families in the audience visibly reacted with grief, anger, and disbelief that she had minimized their loved ones' deaths in such a manner. The next clip played, where she said, "I would say our country should be more fearful of white men." Military families, many of whom were white men who had served, tensed up visibly. Another clip played of Omar comparing the United States to the Taliban, saying America commits atrocities just like terrorists do. One more clip followed where she stated, "This is not going to be the country of white people." Each clip made the audience angrier, and each one showed contempt for the country that saved her. Vance set down his phone and reminded her that she fled extremism in Somalia, fleeing violence, persecution, and chaos. "America saved you from all of that," he said, his voice growing harder and more disappointed than angry, like a parent confronting an ungrateful child. "And now you defend extremists. You minimize terrorism against Americans, and you compare the country that rescued you to the terrorists you fled from." He gestured to the audience and asked how many of them would welcome a refugee into their home, give them food, shelter, and everything they need. Hands raised throughout the room, proving that Americans are generous people. And then watch them criticize you, tell you your home is problematic, defend people who want to hurt you, and attack your values, Vance continued. The audience understood immediately and shook their heads, signaling there was no way they would tolerate that. "Would you accept that behavior?" he asked, and multiple voices from the audience shouted, "No!" "Then why should America accept it from our Congress?" The question landed like a hammer. Vance walked back toward Omar, appearing not threatening but simply inescapable. "This is the second time I am asking you today, Congresswoman, and I will ask it 5 more times before we are done. Which country do you represent?" His voice carried that Marine Corps authority, the right to ask that question earned through service. When you call 9/11, some people did something. When you minimize the worst attack on American soil, which country are you representing? When you compare America to the Taliban, the same extremists who would have killed you in Somalia, which country are you representing? When you say America should be more fearful of white men, the same white men who serve in our military, including the ones who saved refugees like you, which country are you representing? Each question built on the last. each one unanswerable without admitting her contempt for America. Omar tried her victim card, the deflection she always used, stating, "Vice President, this kind of questioning is Islamophobic." Vance shut it down immediately, telling her to stop, his voice now like steel. "Do not play that card with me. I served with Muslims in Iraq and treated Muslim soldiers and civilians in my field medical unit. I have Muslim friends, Muslim colleagues, and Muslim fellow veterans," he said as he stepped closer. "This isn't about your religion. This is about your loyalty." He clarified that he was not questioning whether she is Muslim, but questioning whether she loves America. The distinction was crystal clear, and the fact that she immediately jumped to Islamophobia instead of simply saying, "Yes, I love America," told everyone watching exactly what they needed to know. The audience erupted in applause, with military families standing, 9/11 survivors nodding, and even some of the Somali Americans in the back clapping because they actually loved America and had seen this behavior before. Omar sat there wrapping herself in victimhood whenever confronted with accountability, but trapped as the applause washed over her because her deflection had failed spectacularly. Vance wasn't done, not even close, stating calmly as the applause died down that they would get into specifics. "We will discuss your 9/11 comments, your anti-Semitism, your voting record, and your fraud, all of which is documented, proven, and undeniable." He returned to his seat and settled in, signaling this was going to take a while. But first, he wanted to make sure everyone understood the fundamental betrayal being discussed. He looked directly at the camera, addressing America, stating, "We saved her life. We gave her everything, and she repays us by attacking us, by voting against our interests, by defending our enemies, and by minimizing attacks on us." His voice carried profound disappointment as he declared that this is not representation, this is not service, this is betrayal. "That is the ungrateful refugee in action," he said, and the nickname landed and stuck, destined to follow her forever. Omar knew it, and the studio felt heavier now, because the opening confrontation had set the tone that this wasn't going to be a polite policy discussion, but a reckoning. Vance pulled out another folder, thicker this time, containing more evidence, and Omar visibly tensed. "Let's talk about September 11th, 2001. His voice went very quiet, possessing that dangerous quiet. The 9/11 families in the audience sat up straighter, realizing this was their moment, their pain, and their lost loved ones about to be honored, while Omar's minimization of their deaths was about to be exposed. "Congresswoman, you gave a speech in March 2019 at a CARE fundraising event, and you said something that Americans will never, ever forget." Vance played the clip, and Omar's own voice filled the studio, sounding casual, dismissive, and almost flippant. CARE was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties. The clip ended in silence, and Vance repeated the key phrase slowly, letting each word hit like a physical blow. People did something. He looked at the 9/11 families and at the photos they held, acknowledging their grief still visible after over 20 years. 3,000 Americans died on September 11, 2001, and his voice carried the weight of every single one. Fathers who kissed their children goodbye that morning, thinking it was just another day at work. Mothers who took the subway to the Twin Towers, never knowing they would never come home, and sons and daughters on those planes. Vance wasn't reciting statistics. He was honoring the dead, making them real, and making them matter. He spoke of firefighters who ran into those burning buildings, when everyone else was running out. Police officers who climbed those stairs knowing they might not make it back down. And first responders who gave their lives trying to save strangers. His voice grew stronger and more passionate as he stated, "They weren't some people, Congresswoman." He stood up again and walked to where the 9/11 families sat. They were Americans. They had names, families who loved them, and dreams that died in those towers, on those plains, and in that field in Pennsylvania. Vance gestured to the photos the families held and asked Mr. Nicholas Harros to please stand. A man in his late 50s rose slowly, possessing a strong jaw and military bearing despite never having served. The bearing of someone who had carried grief for over 2 decades and learned to function despite it. He clutched a photo of his father smiling, alive in better times. "Mr. Harros, your father died in the North Tower, yes, sir?" Vance asked. His voice was controlled and practiced, for he had told this story before at memorials and grave sites to his own children, so they would remember the grandfather they never knew. "Tell us about him," Vance requested. Nicholas looked at the photo in his hands and swallowed hard before speaking. "My father's name was Francis Joseph Harros," he said, pausing to breathe because even after all these years, speaking his father's name in public broke something open inside. "He wasn't some people. He was my father." He explained that his father went to work that morning at the World Trade Center, kissed his mother goodbye, and told her he loved her just like every other morning. His voice cracked, but he pushed through, stating simply, "He never came home." Silence filled the studio, just his pain filling the space. "Those weren't some people who attacked us," he said, anger mixing with grief now. "They were Al-Qaeda terrorists, Islamic extremists who wanted to kill as many Americans as possible and who planned for years to murder us." He looked directly at Omar and declared, "And it wasn't something, it was mass murder, the worst terror attack on American soil. 3,000 people burned alive, jumped from buildings to escape the flames, or were crushed when those towers collapsed." Nicholas's hands trembled holding his father's photo as he continued, "My father called my mother that morning from the 101st floor. The smoke was getting bad. He could barely breathe." His voice broke completely now as he recounted, "And he told her he loved her. Told her to tell us kids he loved us. That we should be good. That we should make him proud." He couldn't continue, and he didn't need to, because everyone knew how that call ended. "And you," he said, pointing at Omar with accusation, grief, and rage all mixed together. "You call his death, some people did something, like a car accident, like spilled coffee, like it was just something." His voice rose despite trying to control it, as he held up the photo higher and forced Omar to see. "Look at him. Look at my father. He wasn't some people. He was a man, an American, your constituent." The studio felt his pain, his fury, and his profound betrayal that a United States Congresswoman could minimize his father's murder like that. Vance let the testimony breathe, letting it sink into everyone watching. Then he called another witness, Miss Amanda Davis, a woman in her mid-40s who stood in professional clothes with red eyes from crying, proving some wounds never fully heal. "Your brother died on United Flight 175, yes?" Vance asked in a soft but determined voice. "Tell us about him." Amanda pulled out her phone and showed a photo of a young man in his late 20s with a big smile and full of life. "Mark Davis was my little brother, 29 years old, a hockey scout for the LA Kings. He was on that flight from Boston to LA for work, doing what he loved," she said, pausing to collect herself. "After the hijacking started, He called their mother and told her what was happening, that men with box cutters had taken over the plane and were flying erratically. Tears flowed now, but she kept going, recounting that he told her he loved her, loved all of them, and that, if he didn't make it, she couldn't finish that sentence. Then Islamic terrorists flew that plane into the South Tower. My brother was murdered along with everyone else on that flight, and thousands in the building. Amanda looked at Omar with a mixture of pain and anger that cut to the bone. He wasn't killed by some people. He was murdered by terrorists who hated America, who wanted to destroy us, who celebrated our pain, she declared. She stepped closer to where Omar sat and said, "And you, who America saved from violence, who America rescued from danger, who America gave everything to, you minimize his death." Her grief turned to fury as she asked, "How dare you dismiss my brother's murder? How dare you minimize the worst day in American history? How dare you disrespect the 3,000 Americans who died?" The pain in the studio was overwhelming, real, raw, and unhealed even after over 20 years. Vance addressed Omar directly, his voice quiet but carrying absolute contempt. "Congresswoman, you fled Somalia because of violence, because extremists were killing people based on ideology and clan affiliation, because terrorism destroyed your country. America saved you from that," he noted, "giving you safety from the exact kind of extremism that killed these Americans." His voice grew harder and colder. "And then, when Islamic extremists, the same ideology that destroyed your homeland, attack America, attack the country that saved you, and murder 3,000 of your constituents," he paused for devastating effect, "you call it, 'Some people did something.' Let that sink in," he urged. "If some people had done something in Mogadishu when you were 9 years old, you would be dead. Your family would be dead, killed by extremists doing something." The parallel was crushing. But when extremists attack America, kill 3,000 Americans, and destroy families like the Harros and Davis families, you minimize it, dismiss it, and treat their deaths like an inconvenience that led to discrimination against Muslims. This was the third usage of the devastating hook, even more powerful now after the testimony of grieving families. "Which country do you represent, Congresswoman?" Vance asked. "Because when you minimize the worst attack on American soil, when you show more sympathy for Muslims who face discrimination than for the 3,000 Americans who died, and when you dismiss mass murder as something," Vance's contempt was absolute. "You are not representing America. You are not representing Minnesota. You are representing the ideology that attacked us." Omar tried one more deflection, desperate now, stating she was trying to address the backlash against Muslim Americans. "Then you address it without minimizing the attacks." Vance's voice rose for the first time all night, real anger breaking through that marine calm. "You can condemn discrimination against Muslims without calling 9/11. Some people did something. You can defend religious freedom without dismissing mass murder." He leaned forward, his voice dropping back to that dangerous quiet. "Unless you don't actually think 9/11 was that serious, unless you don't actually care about those 3,000 Americans, unless you prioritize Muslim victimhood over American lives." He paused. "In which case, the question stands, which country do you represent?" Omar sat there trapped, unable to answer without confirming everything Vance accused her of. The 9/11 families watched and waited, their pain acknowledged, their loved ones honored, and their grief validated. Omar had nothing to say that wouldn't make it infinitely worse. The ungrateful refugee had just been confronted with the cost of her minimizing American deaths, and America was watching. Vance didn't let up, and didn't give her breathing room. The confrontation was building, getting worse for Omar with each passing minute. He pulled out another folder, and Omar's eyes widened slightly because she knew what was in this one, too. "Let's talk about your statements regarding Jewish Americans and the state of Israel," Vance said. The Jewish families scattered throughout the audience leaned forward. They had been waiting for this, watching Omar attack their community for years, and finally someone with authority was calling her out. Vance pulled out his phone again and queued up tweets and statements, all documented and undeniable. The first tweet appeared on screen. "Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel." He let it hang there. The next one appeared. "It's all about the Benjamins, baby," posted when discussing support for Israel. Another video clip played of Omar accusing American Jews of allegiance to a foreign country. More clips followed of Omar defending the BDS movement, comparing Israel to Nazi Germany, and using language about Jews that hadn't been socially acceptable since the 1930s. Each one was worse than the last. Vance set down his phone, his voice carrying profound disappointment. "You used language about Jews that Adolf Hitler would have recognized, that the Nazis used, that led directly to the Holocaust," he stated, not exaggerating, but just stating historical fact. "Hypnotizing the world," he explained, "is the conspiracy theory that Jews secretly control everything, a lie dating back centuries used to justify pogroms, persecution, and murder. All about the Benjamins is the stereotype that Jews buy influence with money, another ancient trope and another lie that led to violence. Allegiance to a foreign country is dual loyalty, the accusation that Jews cannot be trusted, that they are not really Americans or Germans or French, but secretly loyal to other Jews. A lie used by Nazis, by Stalin, and by every anti-Semite in history." Vance's voice grew harder. "And you, who fled persecution in Somalia, who escaped from people killing others based on identity, who was saved by a country that protects religious freedom, you use this language against Jews in America, the country that took you in." He gestured to the audience and asked Ms. Sarah Goldstein to please stand. An elderly woman rose slowly, likely over 80 years old, frail but with that inner strength survivors possess, the kind developed when you have been through hell and somehow made it out alive. She moved toward the front carefully, as everyone waited respectfully, knowing what they were about to see. Sarah didn't speak at first, but simply rolled up her left sleeve. The concentration camp tattoo was faded, numbers carved into her skin over 75 years ago, but still visible, still there, and always there. The studio went completely silent because everyone knew what that mark meant. "Mrs. Goldstein," Vance's voice was gentle now, respectful. "You survived Auschwitz, yes?" Her voice was steady despite her age, her German accent still present after all these decades in America. "Tell us what you experienced." Sarah touched the tattoo unconsciously, a gesture she had probably made 10,000 times in her life. "I heard this language before," she said, her voice controlled. She had told this story before at schools, museums, and remembrance ceremonies, because the world must never forget. In Germany in the 1930s, before they came for us, she looked around the studio, making sure people understood. Jews control the world. Jews hypnotize people. Jews buy influence. Jews aren't loyal to their countries. This is what they said about us in newspapers, on radio, and in speeches. Her voice grew stronger despite her age. "My father owned a small shop. We weren't rich. We weren't powerful. We were just Jewish. And they said we controlled everything, that we were the problem." Sarah held up her arm and showed the tattoo to the cameras. This is what that language led to. Auschwitz, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen. 6 million Jews murdered. My parents, my 3 brothers, my 2 sisters, my friends, my neighbors, all gone. She turned to look directly at Omar, showing no anger in her eyes, but something worse. Profound sadness and disappointment from someone who had seen this movie before and knew how it ended. And you, who America saved from genocide in Somalia, you use this language against Jews in America, she said, her voice carrying the weight of 6 million murdered souls. Have you learned nothing from history? The question hung there unanswerable. Sarah sat down slowly, and the studio remained silent. What could anyone say after that? Vance called another witness, a younger man of college age, Daniel Abrams, a student at the University of Minnesota. A young man stood with a yarmulke on his head, nervous but determined. Yes, sir? You are a constituent of Congresswoman Omar, yes? Vance asked. Tell us what happened to you. Daniel pulled out his phone and showed a photo of a crude swastika spray-painted on a door, and underneath it read, "It's all about the Benjamins, get out." Someone put this on my dorm room door last year, he said, noting they used her exact words, her rhetoric. His voice shook with controlled anger. I'm 19 years old, I've never even been to Israel, but someone thought it was okay to put a Nazi symbol on my door because a congresswoman made anti-Semitism acceptable again. He looked at Omar and stated, "You aren't just criticizing Israeli policy. You are legitimizing hatred of Jews. You are making it okay to attack us. You are giving permission to the people who want to hurt us." Daniel's voice broke slightly as he added, "My grandfather survived the Holocaust, came to America, and told me this was the one country where Jews would always be safe, where we'd never face persecution again, because we had freedom of religion here." His pain was visceral. And now I have a congresswoman using Hitler's language about my people in America. Vance let both testimonies sink in, then addressed Omar with barely controlled fury. You fled Somalia because of clan-based persecution, because people were killing others based on identity, because religious extremism and hatred destroyed your country. America gave you refuge from that, safety from persecution based on who you are, and freedom to practice your religion without fear. His voice grew colder. And then you persecute Jews with your rhetoric. You legitimize the exact kind of bigotry and hatred you fled from. You use language that led to the murder of 6 million people. He gestured to Mrs. Goldstein, sitting there with her tattoos still visible. She survived the camps, survived what that language leads to, and she had to sit here and listen to a United States Congresswoman in America use that same language against her people. This was the 4th usage of the hook, devastating after the testimony. Which country do you represent? Because America stands against anti-Semitism, America said never again after the Holocaust, and America protects Jews and defends religious freedom for everyone. But you use Nazi rhetoric against Jews. You defend movements trying to destroy the only Jewish state. You vote against condemning anti-Semitism, and you legitimize hatred that leads to violence. Vance's contempt was absolute. Which country do you represent? Because America doesn't use Hitler's language, America doesn't legitimize genocide, and America doesn't attack Jews for being Jews. Omar tried her standard deflection, the one she always used when confronted with her anti-Semitism, claiming criticism of the Israeli government isn't anti-Semitism. Stop hiding behind that excuse, Vance's voice cracked like a whip. He stood up and towered over her seated form. Saying Israel has hypnotized the world isn't criticizing policy, It's an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, he declared, saying it's all about the Benjamins when Jews support Israel isn't criticizing lobbying, it's an anti-Semitic stereotype. Accusing American Jews of dual loyalty isn't criticizing U.S.-Israel relations, it's an anti-Semitic trope. Each point landed like a hammer blow. These are the same lies that led to the Holocaust, the same rhetoric that murdered 6 million Jews, the same hatred that your fellow refugees from other countries fled. His voice dropped to that dangerous quiet again, and Mrs. Goldstein, with a Nazi tattoo on her arm, had to listen to you use that language in the United States Congress, in America. He leaned down slightly to make sure she felt the full weight of his judgment. You should be ashamed, but I don't think you are, because if you had shame, you would have apologized years ago. Instead, you keep doing it. Keep attacking Jews, keep using their language, and keep legitimizing hatred, which tells me everything I need to know about which country you represent. Omar sat there in silence, her deflection destroyed, her excuses rejected, and her anti-Semitism exposed for millions to see. The Jewish families in the audience watched, some with tears and some with satisfaction, that finally someone with authority was calling her out. Mrs. Goldstein sat quietly, her testimony having spoken volumes, the tattoo on her arm a permanent reminder of what that language leads to. Omar had absolutely no defense that wouldn't make everything worse. The ungrateful refugee had just been exposed as someone who attacks the very people America protects. Vance pulled out the thickest folder yet, and Omar actually flinched. This was going to be bad. Let's look at your voting record, Congresswoman, not as isolated incidents, but as a pattern, a consistent, undeniable pattern of voting against American interests. He opened the folder to reveal pages of voting records, documented, official, and undeniable. But Vance didn't just list the votes. He explained what each one meant and what each one said about whose side she was on. He started with the BDS resolution, House Resolution 246 from July 2019, explaining it simply. BDS is the movement to boycott, divest from, and sanction Israel, our closest ally in the Middle East, the only democracy in the region under constant attack from terrorists who want to destroy it. Congress voted to condemn BDS, to say we stand with our ally and oppose economic warfare against a democracy. Vance held up the vote tally. 398 members voted yes, 17 voted no. Let that sink in. 398 versus 17, and you were one of the 17. He looked at her not with anger, but with profound disappointment. Not a policy disagreement, a choice. You chose to side with those trying to destroy our ally rather than stand with America's interests. Next was the Iran sanctions vote, House Joint Resolution 31, in May 2019. He explained that Iran is the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, funding Hezbollah, Hamas, and Islamic Jihad, chanting "Death to America" at government rallies and building nuclear weapons. Congress voted to maintain sanctions to prevent them from funding more terrorism and to protect American interests in the region. You voted no. His voice grew harder. You voted to help a country that wants to destroy us, that funds terrorists who kill Americans, that openly calls for our destruction. Why? The question hung there, for no good answer existed. Another vote. Iron Dome funding in September 2021. He explained that Iron Dome is a purely defensive system that shoots down rockets fired at Israeli civilians, saving children's lives without harming anyone, just protecting innocent people from terrorism. Congress voted to fund it 420 to 9. Let those numbers land, 420 to 9, overwhelming support. and you were one of the 9 who voted against protecting children from rocket attacks. Vance's contempt was clear. You voted for terrorists over children, for rockets over protection, against a defensive system that only saves lives. He pulled out more votes, one after another, each one showing the same pattern. Armenian genocide recognition opposed because Turkey didn't like it. Funding for Afghan interpreters who helped us voted no. Sanctions on terrorists voted no. Support for our troops voted no. Each vote made the pattern clearer, showing whose side she was on, and it wasn't America's. It's not one vote, Vance said. It is consistent. Every time America has to choose between our allies and our enemies, you side with enemies. Every time we have to choose between protecting our interests and appeasing others, you appease. Every time we have to choose between standing strong and showing weakness, you choose weakness. He closed the folder. That is not representation. That is systematic betrayal. He called a witness from the audience, Colonel Michael Calhoun. The colonel stood in his army uniform, his prosthetic leg clearly visible, combat medals on his chest representing real service and real sacrifice. Colonel, you lost your leg in Iraq. Yes, sir. I.e. in Fallujah, 2007, the colonel replied, his voice firm with no self-pity, just facts. What did you sacrifice for America? Vance asked. Lost my leg below the knee, spent 2 years in rehab, lost 3 friends in that same attack, carry shrapnel in my back for the rest of my life. He looked at Omar. I bled for this country. Friends died for it. We sacrificed everything to protect America and our allies. His voice grew harder. And she votes to defund them, to help our enemies, to weaken our security after American soldiers paid in blood. The colonel's anger was righteous and earned. What did she sacrifice for America? What did she give? What did she risk? He gestured at his prosthetic. I gave my leg. What did she give? Nothing. She takes our generosity, takes our opportunities, takes our protection, and gives nothing back except votes against our interests. The colonel sat down, his testimony devastating in its simplicity. Vance addressed Omar directly, employing the hook for the 5th time. Which country do you represent, Congresswoman? Because your voting record answers that question clearly. Not America, not Minnesota, someone else. He ticked off on his fingers. You vote against our allies for our enemies, against our security for those who threaten us, against American soldiers for terrorists who kill them. That is not a representative. That is someone working for the other side. His voice dropped to that dangerous quiet. Colonel Calhoun lost his leg defending America. You vote against everything he fought for. He sacrificed everything. You sacrifice nothing and vote against those who do. So I am asking you directly, which country do you represent? Because it is sure as hell not the United States of America. Omar tried to respond, starting to talk about nuanced foreign policy and complex geopolitical situations. Vance cut through it immediately. There is nothing nuanced about voting to help Iran, nothing complex about opposing funding for Iron Dome, nothing geopolitical about systematically voting against American interests. It is simple. You side with our enemies consistently, repeatedly, and undeniably, which tells everyone exactly which country you represent, and it isn't ours. The evidence was overwhelming, the pattern undeniable, the betrayal systematic, and Omar had no explanation that made any sense. Vance pulled out yet another folder, smaller than the others, but potentially the most damaging, concerning legal allegations and potential criminal conduct. Let's talk about your marriages, Congresswoman, and the serious allegations of immigration fraud. Omar went pale. This was the one she really didn't want to discuss. In 2009, you married Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi, Vance stated, noting the documented official records showing the marriage certificate. The problem is, extensive evidence suggests Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi might be your brother, he said, citing DNA evidence, school records, family photos, and testimony from people in Minneapolis's Somali community. He presented the evidence methodically, not sensationally, just facts. If true, and the evidence is substantial, you committed immigration fraud, marriage fraud, and made false statements to federal officials, which are serious federal crimes. But Vance pivoted to the deeper betrayal. Here is what makes this particularly egregious, Congresswoman. The immigration system saved your life. Let that land. America's refugee program, the system that accepted your family when you fled Somalia, is built on trust. We trust that people applying for refugee status are telling the truth, that marriage applications are genuine, and that documentation is accurate. Because if people abuse the system, if they commit fraud, it makes it harder for real refugees who desperately need help. His voice grew harder. And according to substantial evidence, you abused that system, defrauded it, and violated the trust that America placed in you. The same system that saved you, that rescued you from a refugee camp, you potentially committed fraud against it. He pulled out more evidence, not just about the alleged marriage fraud, but campaign finance violations confirmed by Minnesota's Campaign Finance Board. You used campaign funds for personal use, paid your husband's consulting firm millions of dollars, and funneled money through questionable channels. More documentation followed, including FEC complaints and multiple allegations of campaign finance fraud, some settled, some under investigation, all documented. Vance set down the papers. So you allegedly defrauded the immigration system, definitely violated campaign finance laws, and did all this while serving in Congress representing Americans. He looked at her with utter contempt. America saved you, gave you everything, and you repay us by potentially committing fraud against our systems, by violating our laws, by abusing our trust. This was the sixth usage of the devastating hook. Which country do you represent? Because someone who respects America doesn't defraud its immigration system, someone who loves America doesn't violate its campaign finance laws, and someone who's grateful to America doesn't abuse the very systems that saved them. But you did, allegedly and actually. His voice was ice, which tells me, and tells everyone watching, exactly whose side you are on, and it is not America's. Omar tried to deny the allegations, calling them debunked and conspiracy theories. Vance shut it down. The marriage records are public. The evidence is documented. Minneapolis reporters have investigated this extensively, and your own community has raised questions. The allegations aren't conspiracy theories. They are based on actual evidence that has never been adequately explained. And the campaign finance violations aren't alleged. They are confirmed by the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board. You were found guilty. It is a fact. He leaned forward. You cannot dismiss documented evidence as conspiracy theories. You cannot wave away confirmed violations as debunked. The records exist. The evidence exists. The findings exist. And they all point to the same conclusion. You abused systems you should have respected. You violated laws you should have followed. And you betrayed trust you should have honored. Because you don't respect America, you don't represent America. You represent only yourself. The allegations were laid out, the evidence presented, and the betrayal exposed. Omar had no defense that made sense, no explanation that rang true, just desperate denials that nobody believed. This section would be shorter but devastating in its own way, because it showed that even Omar's own party could not defend her anymore. Vance pulled out statements, press releases, and voting records, all showing Democrats distancing themselves from Omar. Nancy Pelosi, former Speaker and fellow Democrat, had a statement shown after Omar's anti-Semitic remarks. I am glad that today the leadership of the House spoke out against these comments. Translation: We are condemning you. Another statement from Chuck Schumer, Senate Majority Leader and fellow Democrat, regarding Omar's controversies was brief, cold, and non-committal. I believe Congresswoman Omar's comments were inappropriate. That was it. No defense, no support, just distancing. More evidence followed, showing a House vote on anti-Semitism in March 2019, where Democrats introduced a resolution specifically because of her statements. They didn't defend you. They condemned you by resolution on the record. He showed the reactions of the squad. Rashida Tlaib, your squad sister and ally, released a statement after this town hall was scheduled saying, I can't comment on members' personal situations. Not, I support her, not these allegations are false, just avoidance. AOC, another squad member, stated, I'm focused on my own district's priorities. Translation: I am not touching this with a 10-foot pole. Even progressive Democrats were fleeing. Jewish Democrats have called for your removal from the Foreign Affairs Committee, members of your own party, because your anti-Semitism is too toxic even for them. Vance gestured to the mostly empty seats where other Democrats had been sitting. Look around this studio. Where are your colleagues, your party leadership, your squad sisters? They left quietly during breaks, found reasons to be elsewhere, because nobody wants to be associated with you anymore. You are toxic. Your brand is poison, and even progressives cannot defend you. He let that isolation sink in. When your own party abandons you, when your own allies won't defend you, when Democrats, who should support you, instead condemn you, that tells you everything. You are not just wrong, you are indefensible. The evidence of abandonment was clear. Omar sat there essentially alone, no allies visible, no support coming, even her own party having given up on her. The town hall had been going for nearly 2 hours, the confrontation building, the evidence mounting, and the betrayal exposed from every angle. Now came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The final confrontation. The question that couldn't be dodged anymore. Vance stood and gathered all his folders, all the evidence, all the testimony, and all the documentation of Omar's systematic betrayal of the country that saved her. He walked slowly toward where she sat, not threatening, just final. This was judgment. The studio held its breath as military families sat forward, 9/11 survivors gripped their photos tighter, and Somali Americans who loved America watched intently, knowing something important was about to happen. Brett Baer started to interject, then thought better of it. This was bigger than him now. This was history. Vance stopped 3 feet from Omar, looking down at her with that Marine Corps tie bearing, that authority earned through service and sacrifice. Congresswoman Omar, we have been here for nearly 2 hours. His voice was calm, with that dangerous calm. I have presented evidence of your minimizing 9/11, your anti-Semitism, your votes against American interests, your alleged fraud, and your betrayal of the country that saved your life. He set down all the folders on the desk in front of her, a physical representation of her failures. I have introduced you to Nicholas Harros, who lost his father in the Twin Towers, Amanda Davis, who lost her brother on Flight 175, Mrs. Goldstein, who survived the Holocaust and heard you use Nazi rhetoric. Daniel Abrams, who had a swastika put on his door because you legitimized anti-Semitism. And Colonel Calhoun, who lost his leg defending the very interests you vote against. Each name landed with weight. And I have asked you 6 times tonight the simplest question in American politics. He leaned down slightly, making sure she felt the full weight of what was coming. Which country do you represent? His voice carried authority and command, the right to demand an answer. I've asked after your anti-American statements, after your 9/11 minimization, after your anti-Semitism, after your voting record, after your fraud, after your own party abandoned you. 6 times, 6 different contexts, same question. And 6 times you have dodged, deflected, played victim, blamed Islamophobia, and changed the subject. Vance straightened and crossed his arms in that Marine stance. But America deserves an answer. The families who lost loved ones on 9/11 deserve an answer. The Jews you attacked deserve an answer. The soldiers who sacrificed deserve an answer. His voice grew stronger. My family has been in this country for generations. We built this nation, worked in coal mines, served in wars, paid taxes, raised families, and contributed to America for over 100 years. I served this country in uniform, deployed to Iraq, wore the flag on my shoulder, took the oath to protect and defend, and bled for this nation in that desert. The contrast with Omar couldn't be clearer. I represent Americans, working people, people who love this country, people who want it to be strong and safe and prosperous. I can answer the question immediately and without hesitation. I represent the United States of America. He leaned down again. Your turn. One last time. 7th time, final chance. His voice carried the weight of judgment. Which country do you represent? 10 seconds of silence passed. Omar's mouth opened, closed, opened again, but nothing came out. 15 seconds. She glanced at her notes as if the answer was written there somewhere, but it wasn't because there was no good answer. 20 seconds. She looked at Brett Baer, silently pleading for help, for intervention, for anything. He was watching, taking notes. This was news. He couldn't save her. 25 seconds. Someone in the audience coughed, the sound echoing in the dead silence, making it worse. 30 seconds. The camera zoomed tighter on Omar's face, sweat visible now, makeup starting to fail, eyes blinking rapidly, panic visible despite trying to hide it. 35 seconds. A military wife in the front row shook her head slowly, disappointed and disgusted, for that was all she needed to say. 40 seconds. Omar's lips moved, forming words she couldn't say. Any answer destroyed her. Say America. Her record contradicted it. Say anything else. Career over. Stay silent. Admission through omission. 45 seconds. She tried. Voice barely a whisper. I represent my constituents. Are they Americans? Vance cut through immediately, not letting her dodge. Do you vote for American interests? Do you stand with America or against it? Yes or no? 5 more seconds of silence. Total now 50 seconds. The longest silence in television history live on national TV, with 60 million watching. And she couldn't answer the simplest question. Which country do you represent? Omar opened her mouth one more time, but nothing came out. Just nothing. Vance didn't need to wait longer. The silence had answered. For the record, the Congresswoman declines to answer which country she represents. He stepped back, letting that verdict hang there. I think that tells America everything we need to know. He looked directly at the camera, at the nation. She can't say she represents America because her record proves she doesn't. She won't say she represents somewhere else because that ends her career. So she says nothing, which is the loudest answer of all. Vance picked up one folder, the voting record. Every vote against our allies, for our enemies, against our security, for those who threaten us. He picked up another folder, the 9/11 evidence. Some people did something. 3,000 Americans reduced to footnote status. Then the anti-Semitism folder, Hitler's language against Jews in the United States Congress. Finally, the fraud folder, alleged crimes against the systems that saved her life. He set them all down. You are not a representative, Congresswoman. You are the ungrateful refugee who takes everything America offers and gives nothing back except a tax, except contempt, except votes against our interests. His voice carried final judgment. You don't represent America. You never have. You represent only yourself, your ideology, your grudges, your agenda, but not us, not the United States, not the country that saved your life when you had nowhere else to go. Vance walked back to his seat and sat down. Done. I have nothing more to say to you. America has seen everything it needs to see. The studio erupted in a standing ovation from military families, from 9/11 survivors, from Somali Americans who actually loved the country that welcomed them. Even some journalists in the back, uncomfortable but unable to deny what they had witnessed, were applauding. Omar sat there in the noise, alone, isolated, exposed, unable to answer the simplest question a representative should be able to answer without thinking. Which country do you represent? Her silence had answered it, and America would never forget. The video went viral before the town hall even ended. The opening quote, the devastating hook, the 50-second silence, all of it garnered 120 million views across all platforms within 2 hours. Within 12 hours, 300 million worldwide. Within 48 hours, it was the most viral political confrontation in American history. Which country do you represent? Became an instant cultural phenomenon, not just a political question, but a hearing moment, a standard litmus test for every politician. T-shirts appeared within hours saying, America saved you, you voted against us, with Vance's photo, and which country do you represent, in bold letters. 50 seconds of silence, with a countdown graphic, and the ungrateful refugee with Omar's photo crossed out, appeared on bumper stickers everywhere. Yard signs in military communities read, I represent America, do you? Social media exploded, not just with conservatives, but with people across the spectrum acknowledging the power of what they had witnessed. Veterans flooded every platform with their own I Represent America posts, photos in uniform and stories of service, asking politicians the same question Vance asked. Even some progressive commentators had to acknowledge the impact. CNN's Jake Tapper stated, whatever your politics, watching someone unable to answer which country do you represent for 50 seconds is devastating. That silence spoke volumes. MSNBC struggled. Joy Reid tried to defend Omar, calling it Islamophobic questioning. But the backlash was immediate and crushing, with tens of thousands of responses. He asked, which country, not which religion? Stop deflecting. She voted against American interests. That's not Islamophobia. That's facts. Muslim veterans were asking the same question. Don't make this about religion when it's about loyalty. The 9/11 family's testimonies had particular impact. Nicholas Harros, became a folk hero overnight. His pain, his father's memory, and his confrontation with Omar resonating deeply. He gave interviews, each one showing the same righteous anger. My father wasn't some people. She needed to hear that. America needed to hear that. And she couldn't answer which country she represents because the answer is obvious. Not ours. Amanda Davis, too, shared her brother's story, her grief still raw, and her demand for respect. If you can't say you represent America when America saved your life, you shouldn't be in Congress, period. Mrs. Goldstein's testimony became an educational tool, with schools, museums, and Holocaust remembrance organizations showing it to demonstrate what anti-Semitism looks like and why it matters. Political consequences came fast. Within 72 hours, a primary challenger emerged. A Somali-American male named Hassan Ahmed, born in Somalia, came to America legally, served 4 years in the U.S. Army, and loved America. His announcement video was devastating. "I'm Somali like Congresswoman Omar. I'm Muslim like her. I came from Somalia like her. But there is one critical difference." He looked at the camera. "I love America. I can say that clearly, without hesitation, without 50 seconds of silence. I represent the United States of America, not Somalia, not any other country. America, the country that welcomed me, that gave me opportunities, that I served in uniform. If you can't say that, you don't deserve to represent us." The video garnered 20 million views in 24 hours. Omar's approval rating in her district collapsed, down 47 points in 1 week. Even in heavily Democratic, heavily Somali neighborhoods, her base support evaporated because Somali Americans who loved America were furious at her for making them all look bad. Democrats in leadership went silent. Pelosi declined to comment, and Schumer said no comment 16 times to reporters. Squad members suddenly had no opinions about one of their own. Complete abandonment. Jewish organizations that had opposed Omar for years felt vindicated. Finally, someone with authority had called her out. And finally, her anti-Semitism had been exposed on national television with consequences. The ADL, AJC, and Simon Wiesenthal Center all released statements thanking Vance for standing up to anti-Semitism and demanding accountability. Military organizations did the same, with the VFW, American Legion, and Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America all praising Vance for asking the tough questions and exposing Omar's systematic votes against American interests. The evidence was undeniable, the testimony was powerful, and the silence was damning. 2 months later, Hassan Ahmed won the Democratic primary in a landslide, 73% to 27%. Omar was crushed in her own primary. Her concession speech was brief, bitter, and blamed everyone except herself, claiming this was a campaign of Islamophobia, but even her supporters tuned out. They had heard it before, and the victim card didn't work anymore. In November 2026, Hassan Ahmed was elected to Congress. The first thing he did after being sworn in was stand on the House floor, look at the camera, and say, "I represent the United States of America, proudly, clearly, without hesitation. America welcomed me. I will always be grateful. I will always work for American interests. I will always love this country." He received a standing ovation from Democrats and Republicans, everyone acknowledging what should have been obvious, but what Omar could never say. For J.D. Vance, the reaction was overwhelming. His approval rating among all Americans hit 78%, among military families 91%, and among working-class voters 86%. He had asked the question everyone wanted answered, demanded accountability everyone wanted enforced, and stood up for values everyone believed in. 6 months after the town hall, Vance did an interview about it. People asked if he regretted how hard he went at Congresswoman Omar. He shook his head. No regrets. She betrayed the country that saved her life. She voted against American interests. She minimized 9/11. She used Nazi rhetoric against Jews. All documented, all proven, all undeniable. The interviewer asked about the 50-second silence. That silence told America everything, Vance said. She couldn't answer which country she represents because the honest answer would have ended her career. So she said nothing. But silence is an answer. It is admission. It is confirmation of everything I accused her of. He looked at the camera. Every American can answer that question immediately. Which country do you represent? America. No hesitation, no doubt, no 50-second pause. If you can't answer that question, you don't deserve to represent us. Asked what message he wanted Americans to remember, he said, ask every politician, which country do you represent? If they hesitate, if they deflect, if they make it complicated, they are not representing you. Real representatives can answer immediately because they actually represent America. His final words were poignant. We are a nation of immigrants. We welcome people from everywhere. But when we welcome you, when we give you opportunities, when we save your life, we expect gratitude, we expect loyalty, we expect you to love America. Not just take from America, love America. If you can't do that, you don't belong in our Congress. The working-class kid from Middletown had asked the question that needed asking. The ungrateful refugee had been exposed, and America had learned a valuable lesson. Representation requires loyalty, service requires love, and if you cannot say which country you represent, you don't deserve to represent anyone. A year after the town hall, Hassan Ahmed served in Congress with distinction, voted for American interests, supported allies, opposed enemies, and did the job Omar should have done. When asked about his predecessor, he was diplomatic. She had opportunities I can only dream about. America gave her everything. She chose to attack instead of serve. He paused. I won't make that mistake. America welcomed me, gave me a future, and I will spend my career repaying that generosity. Not with criticism, with service, not with attacks, with gratitude, not with contempt, with love, because that's what representatives should do. The "which country do you represent" question became a permanent standard. Every candidate faced it, and every politician had to answer it. No deflection was accepted. Some failed the test, couldn't answer clearly, and were voted out. Most passed, said America without hesitation, and proved their loyalty through votes and service. The ungrateful refugee became a cautionary tale, an example of what happens when you betray the country that saved you, when you take everything and give nothing back, when you attack instead of serve. Schools taught about the town hall not as political theater but as a civics lesson. This is what representation means. This is what loyalty requires. This is what Americans expect. And every student learned the question, the simplest question in politics. Which country do you represent? If you can't answer, you shouldn't serve. J.D. Vance had asked it once, and America has been asking it ever since.